Hi, I'm Michael, and welcome to the first video lesson from Music Theory Help right here on YouTube. Today we'll be talking about pitch and staff notation. This is a great place to get started for those who don't have a background in reading music, but as these videos continue, we will be dealing with many advanced topics in music theory. Pitch is the frequency that you hear when you hear a sound. You might hear a high-pitched sound, or you might hear a low-pitched sound. And staff notation is the way we communicate this pitch as well as other information like rhythm to musicians so they can sing or play what is notated in their music. We use 7 letter names A through G to specify pitch, and when we get to G, we start over with A. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and A. It's continuous. Or we can go down A, G, F, E, D, C, B, and A. It's continuous in the other direction as well. 2 key concepts. The first is the concept of an octave. Pitches which are an octave apart share a letter name. So A to A is an octave. You'll notice those notes sound very much the same, just one is higher than the other. They're both A. They share the same letter name. They're an octave apart. Octave meaning 8. They are 8 letter names apart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So A to A is an octave, or D to D is an octave. Pitches which are an octave apart share a letter name. That's the first key concept. The other key concept is being able to think in thirds. Now, what is that? Thinking in thirds means skipping a letter. So we might have C, E, G. We're skipping a letter. It's like 1, 2, 3. But instead of 1, 2, 3, it's 1 and 3. And then we're again saying 1, 2, 3, going up to G. So C, E, G. Thinking in thirds, skipping a letter, or we might have D, F, A. We're building a chord when we're doing this, but we'll talk about that in later lessons. So the idea of an octave and the idea of thinking in thirds or skipping a letter. Let's take what we've learned and apply it to the piano keyboard. You'll see how the piano keyboard is laid out here. We have groupings of 2 black notes and groupings of 3 black notes. In the pitch A, you'll see where it is in relation to the grouping of 3 black notes. Today, we're really mostly talking about the white keys or the white notes on the piano. We can do just what we did before, but now on the piano keyboard. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And we can go down. A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G. I'm going to go all the way. F, E, D, and C. We can see the same 2 key concepts here. Pitches which are an octave apart share a letter name. We might have D to D. Those are an octave apart. Or we might have F to F, an octave apart. We can also see the pitches that are thirds apart. That is skipping a letter name like E, G, B. Again, that's building a chord. We'll talk about that in a later video. Or we might have G, B, D, a third apart. That's an important skill to have in skipping a letter name. And both these concepts will be important as we go on to the next thing, which is writing these pitches on a staff. So here's a staff. It has 5 lines and 4 spaces. We can label these lines and spaces with numbers. This is always from the bottom. So the lines 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Or the spaces, again from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, and 4. A staff itself is not enough information to specify pitch. You have to have a clef, and that's what we have on the left side. This is a treble clef. It's used to notate higher pitched voices and instruments. It's also sometimes called a G clef, the reason being the circular part of the clef that circles the second line that is actually the pitch G. So the black note that's already written there, that is A. You guessed it from where we started in our last two examples. We can do exactly the same thing. We're going up by line space each time. So A is on a space. As we go up to the line, this is B, and up to the next space, C, D, E, F, G. We can write it above the fifth line. And when we get to A, we actually need what's called a ledger line. We just write another line above the staff just for that note. And there's A. This is called a ledger line. We can have many ledger lines. We could go up to 3 ledger lines. That's actually an E up there. Let's go down from A. We have A, and then down to the line would be G. As we know, this is a G clef. That second line is G. Here's the first space, F. The first line, E. Below the first line, D. One ledger line below, this is C. This is actually called middle C. We'll talk more about middle C in the next video. A ledger line below is B. 2 ledger lines below is A. So we can see our pitches written out kind of in a linear fashion here on a staff with a treble clef. Let's look at this in a little bit different way. Many times when we're trying to learn our pitches on the staff, we think in terms of the lines and spaces, and this is exactly what we were doing before in skipping letter names, thinking in thirds. So this lowest line, the first line is E, and if we think a third up, we're skipping a letter name, so E, F would be between them, and then you have G. So we'll skip a letter name, we'll think in thirds as we go to B, and up to D, and up to F. Then our spaces, F, A, C, and E. So we're thinking in thirds, we're skipping a letter for each going from space to space or line to line. It's important to memorize these pitches on the staff. You may or may not be familiar with staff notation, but you have to learn to recognize these things quickly. Let's look at octaves on the staff. We're given a C here to begin with. We'll identify the note first, and then we'll write an octave above or an octave below. This is a C. We can count up by letter names if we want to. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and here's C on the third space. We have a D here. What's a D an octave below? We know we had a C, so what if we just step up to D? There we go, an octave below the given D. Notice that with these octaves, of course, as we said before, that pitches that are an octave apart share a letter name. Also, it's important to notice that one is on a space and one is on a line. Pitches that are an octave apart, one will be on a space, one will be on a line when we're talking about the same clef. It's a good visual way to recognize octaves. We're given an A. Here's the A, an octave above. Here's a C. The C, an octave above. And an F. Here's our F, an octave below. Again, we really just have to memorize our lines and spaces and be able to recognize them. But it's good visually to see what octaves look like and to remember that when we're dealing with one clef, pitches in one clef, that one note will be on a line and one will be on a space when they're an octave apart. Let's look at another clef. This is called bass clef. It's used to notate lower pitched voices and instruments. It's also sometimes called F clef because the fourth line is right between these two dots. And you guessed it, that is the pitch F. That's why it's called F clef. So if this is F, what are our other lines? As we go up, we would have A. Again, we're skipping letters because we're going from line to line. As we go down, we would have D, B, and G. Our spaces are A, C, E, and G. This is something, again, that you really have to memorize. You have to be very comfortable with recognizing these on sight and being able to find that note on your instrument. Let's write octaves in bass clef. If our given note is a C, our octave above, we can count letters just like we did before. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. So our C, middle C, is the first ledger line above. Here we have an A. Here's our A, an octave lower. Again, our given note was on a line, so our note that's an octave lower will be on a space. Here's an F to the fourth line F. Again, we'll remember that this is an F clef. Here's a D, an octave above. And here is a B. We'll write a B down an octave. You'll get more comfortable with this as you really steady the clefs and the notes on the clefs and become more comfortable with it. It takes time, but it's something that's really important. You won't be able to do anything as you advance in music theory or as you play your instrument if you can't identify these notes on the staff. One more thing, the grand staff. That's when we take two staves and the upper one has a treble clef and the lower one has a bass clef. The grand staff is very prominent in piano music and when we have four-part vocal music like a hymn or chorale. And piano music and vocal music are two examples of kinds of music that we look at all the time in music theory. So it's important to be able to recognize notes on a grand staff with these two staves together. I want you to see a little bit of how the treble clef and the bass clef are related. We'll talk more about middle C in the next video, but you see on treble clef, the middle C is a ledger line below, and in bass clef, it's a ledger line above. In treble, let's write an octave above that C, and in bass, we'll write an octave below. In bass clef, you see how we're on the second space from the bottom. Treble clef, we usually don't say from the top, but in this case, we're on the second space for the top. They're kind of mirror images of each other. Let's go another octave, an octave up in treble clef, two ledger lines above, an octave below, and bass clef is two ledger lines below. That starts to give you an idea about how treble clef and bass clef are related. I hope you feel like you've learned something today as you're getting started on your journey with music theory. I have study notes and a practice quiz that go over everything that we've talked about today, and it's down in the description. I hope you'll check it out, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.